Welcome to Fatal Crime Investigation, where we uncover the truth behind the world's most chilling cases. Subscribe to the channel for more investigative fatal crime stories. On June 9, 2008, inside a quiet suburban home in Mesa, Arizona, detectives walked into a scene so violent, so emotionally charged, that many of them would never forget it. Blood stained the bathroom floor. A camera lay damaged near the sink. And inside the shower, 27-year-old motivational speaker Travis Alexander was found brutally murdered. At first glance, investigators believed they were looking at a crime fueled by rage. Not robbery. Not random violence. Something personal. Something emotional. The wounds told a disturbing story. This wasn't simply an attack. It felt like hatred. And as detectives began reconstructing Travis Alexander's final hours, one name immediately stood out. Jodi Arias. His ex-girlfriend. The woman who would later calmly claim she acted in self-defense. But from the very beginning, detectives didn't believe her. Because behind the soft voice, the tears, and the carefully crafted explanations, something felt deeply wrong. And the deeper they looked into their relationship, the more terrifying the truth became. To friends and co-workers, Travis Alexander appeared charismatic, ambitious, and deeply religious. He traveled often, spoke at motivational events, and projected the image of a man building a successful future. But behind closed doors, his relationship with Jodi Arias had become emotionally explosive. The two met in 2006. At first, the relationship moved intensely fast. Friends later described it as passionate, obsessive, almost addictive. Jodi quickly immersed herself into Travis's world. She changed her lifestyle, converted religions, moved closer to him, and according to people around them, her emotional attachment began growing stronger than Travis realized. At first, Travis enjoyed the attention. But over time, cracks began appearing. Arguments became frequent. Jealousy escalated. Trust disappeared. And the relationship slowly transformed into something toxic. Still, Travis struggled to fully walk away. Even after they officially separated, the communication continued. Late-night phone calls, secret meetings, emotional intimacy mixed with emotional rejection. It created a dangerous cycle, one that detectives would later describe as emotionally volatile and psychologically unstable. And hidden inside that cycle were warning signs almost everyone ignored. Friends later recalled moments that suddenly felt disturbing in hindsight. Jodi allegedly reading Travis's messages, showing unexpected jealousy, appearing emotionally devastated whenever Travis mentioned other women. At times, Travis reportedly expressed fear about how attached she had become. But like many toxic relationships, the emotional highs kept pulling him back in. And that dramatic irony would later haunt everyone connected to the case. Because while Travis was trying to move forward with his life, investigators would eventually uncover evidence suggesting Jodi wasn't emotionally letting go at all. In fact, she may have been unraveling. Days before the murder, strange details began emerging. Phone activity, sudden travel plans, conflicting timelines. Then came June 4, 2008. The day everything changed. Friends became concerned after Travis stopped answering calls. That was unusual. Very unusual. Eventually, worried friends entered his home. What they discovered shocked them. Police arrived shortly after. And almost immediately, detectives noticed something unusual near the crime scene. A digital camera. Damaged. Thrown into the washing machine. But somehow, the memory card survived. And what investigators recovered from that camera would completely change the investigation. Because the photographs showed Travis alive only moments before his death. And behind the camera was Jodi Arias. Suddenly, the grieving ex-girlfriend became the center of the case. When detectives first questioned Jodi, she appeared calm, controlled, almost strangely prepared. At first, she denied even being there. Then, she changed her story. She claimed masked intruders had attacked them. Later, she changed it again. Now, she claimed it was self-defense. Each version contradicted the last, and investigators began noticing something chilling. Jodi never seemed emotionally connected to the horror of what happened. Instead, she appeared focused on controlling the narrative. That realization marked a major turning point in the investigation. The vulnerable ex-girlfriend image slowly began collapsing, and detectives started seeing someone far more calculating beneath the surface. As forensic teams reconstructed the scene, more disturbing details emerged. Blood evidence suggested Travis had desperately tried to escape. Investigators analyzed the wounds carefully. The violence appeared deeply personal, emotionally explosive, not the chaotic randomness of self-defense. Then came the phone records. Detectives uncovered inconsistencies in Jodi's timeline. Gas receipts, travel distances, deleted messages, and evidence suggesting she may have carefully planned parts of the trip. The more investigators uncovered, the more her explanations stopped making sense. And during interrogations, the psychological tension became impossible to ignore. Detectives confronted her with contradictions. Jodi responded calmly, sometimes smiling, sometimes laughing inappropriately, sometimes speaking as though she were performing for an audience rather than discussing a homicide investigation. Experienced investigators found her behavior deeply unsettling, because underneath the soft tone and emotional storytelling, they believed something darker was hiding, something manipulative. But perhaps the most haunting part of the entire case was how ordinary it once seemed. Two people in a complicated relationship. Arguments, jealousy, breakups, reconciliation. The kinds of emotional patterns millions of people experience every day. Which is exactly why the case disturbed America so deeply. Because it forced people to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most dangerous relationships don't begin with violence. They begin with emotional dependency. Obsession disguised as love. Control disguised as passion. And warning signs ignored because emotions cloud judgment. As the case exploded across national media, the public became divided. Some believed Jodi's claims. Others saw calculated manipulation. But detectives remained focused on one thing: evidence. And the evidence continued pointing in one direction. By the time prosecutors formally built their case, the emotional narrative had completely shifted. Jodi was no longer viewed as the helpless victim of abuse. Instead, investigators portrayed her as someone consumed by rejection, jealousy, and emotional obsession. Someone who may have feared losing control over the one person she could not emotionally let go of. And as more interrogation footage surfaced, public opinion hardened. People noticed the contradictions, the shifting stories, the emotional performance, the apparent manipulation. Yet even then, the full psychological complexity of the case remained deeply disturbing. Because behind every lie, every contradiction, every emotional outburst, was a relationship that had been deteriorating long before the murder itself. A relationship built on instability. And neither side fully escaped its damage. In the end, the murder of Travis Alexander became more than just another true crime headline. It became a cautionary story about emotional obsession, manipulation, and the terrifying consequences of unresolved psychological instability. Because sometimes, the most dangerous people are not strangers hiding in darkness. Sometimes, they are the people standing closest to us. The people we trust. The people we keep giving second chances to, even after the warning signs become impossible to ignore. And perhaps the most haunting lesson of all is that toxic attachment can slowly destroy a person long before violence ever begins. Not every dangerous relationship looks dangerous in the beginning. Some feel exciting, intense, passionate, until the emotional dependency becomes control, and the control becomes something far darker. But just when investigators believed they finally understood what happened inside Travis Alexander's home, they uncovered something deeply disturbing hidden within the digital evidence. A detail suggesting the final moments before the murder may have unfolded very differently than anyone originally believed. And when detectives confronted Jodi with this discovery, her reaction would leave even seasoned investigators stunned. A reaction so chilling, it would change the entire direction of the case. The longer detectives questioned Jodi Arias, the more they realized something chilling. She wasn't simply changing her story. She was adapting it. Carefully. Strategically. Almost as if she were studying the investigation in real time, trying to shape herself into whatever version appeared most believable at that moment. And for experienced homicide detectives, that was deeply unsettling. Because innocent people usually cling to the truth. But Jodi Arias kept moving farther away from it. Inside the interrogation room, investigators laid photographs across the table. Crime scene images, timeline evidence, digital records, and finally, the damaged camera recovered from the washing machine. The same camera that had unknowingly captured Travis Alexander's final moments alive. Detectives watched her expression carefully. At first, she barely reacted. But then investigators revealed something she clearly hadn't expected. Deleted photographs from the memory card had been recovered. Images showing Travis alive shortly before the murder. And images placing Jodi directly inside the home at the exact time she originally claimed she was nowhere near Arizona. The room fell silent. For several seconds, nobody spoke. And then came the moment detectives had been waiting for. Jodi changed her story again. This time, she claimed Travis attacked her first. According to her version, she acted in self-defense during a violent confrontation. But detectives immediately saw problems. Serious problems. Because the forensic evidence didn't support panic. It suggested escalation. The wounds appeared excessive, emotional, personal, and investigators believed the violence reflected rage far beyond survival. As detectives challenged her timeline, the psychological tension inside the room intensified. Jodi remained strangely calm, sometimes smiling softly, sometimes speaking with an unsettling level of composure while describing horrifying events. Even seasoned investigators later admitted her behavior disturbed them, because it felt emotionally disconnected from reality, almost rehearsed. And slowly, the image of the vulnerable ex-girlfriend completely began collapsing. Outside the interrogation room, detectives were building a far darker picture of the relationship. Friends of Travis Alexander described increasing emotional instability in the weeks before his death. Some recalled Travis expressing concern about Jodi's inability to move on. Others described intense jealousy, unexpected appearances, obsessive communication, and moments that now seem deeply alarming in hindsight. But perhaps the most tragic part of the story was the dramatic irony surrounding Travis himself. Because despite the warning signs, he continued allowing Jodi back into his life. Phone calls continued. Private meetings continued. Emotional attachment continued. Even while friends urged him to distance himself completely. And that emotional contradiction would ultimately cost him everything. As prosecutors prepared their case, investigators uncovered additional details that painted a deeply disturbing picture of premeditation. Rental car records, gas can purchases, a weapon linked to the crime, phone activity suggesting careful attempts to avoid detection. Individually, each detail raised suspicion. Together, they formed something far more powerful. A narrative. One prosecutors believed showed planning rather than panic. And when detectives confronted Jodi with the mounting evidence, her reactions became increasingly unpredictable. At times she cried. At times she appeared emotionless. At times she laughed awkwardly during discussions about death. The inconsistency disturbed investigators, because they believed they were watching someone desperately trying to maintain control while the truth slowly closed in around her. Then came one of the most chilling moments of the investigation. Detectives began analyzing the timeline surrounding the final photographs found on the camera. Images captured only minutes before the attack. At first glance, the photos seemed ordinary, almost intimate. Travis relaxed, unaware, trusting the person behind the camera. But investigators noticed something psychologically haunting. There was no visible fear, no sign he believed danger was near, which meant something terrifying. If prosecutors were right, Travis likely never realized the threat until it was too late. And that realization transformed the emotional weight of the case. This wasn't simply violence. It was betrayal at the most personal level imaginable. As the case exploded across American media, the public became obsessed. Television networks replayed interrogation clips nonstop. Body language experts analyzed every smile, every pause, every emotional shift. And millions of viewers found themselves asking the same question. Was Jodi Arias emotionally broken? Or dangerously manipulative? But inside the courtroom, prosecutors focused less on emotion and more on evidence. Blood evidence, forensic reconstruction, digital timelines, behavioral inconsistencies. And slowly, the case against Jodi Arias tightened. Witnesses described the toxic relationship dynamic. Experts testified about emotional obsession and escalating instability. Friends recounted Travis's fears. And prosecutors argued that rejection may have become psychologically unbearable for Jodi. Because by that stage, Travis was moving forward with his life, meeting new women, planning for the future, creating emotional distance. And according to prosecutors, that loss of control may have triggered something catastrophic. Then finally, came the confession. Not a complete confession. Not the kind investigators had hoped for. But enough. Enough to place herself at the center of the violence permanently. Jodi admitted she killed Travis Alexander. But she insisted she had no choice. She described fear, panic, survival. Yet prosecutors believed the evidence told a completely different story. A story of obsession turning deadly. A story of emotional dependency collapsing into rage. And during cross-examination, prosecutors aggressively confronted the contradictions in her testimony. The shifting timelines. The selective memory loss. The impossible details. At several points, Jodi appeared cornered. And viewers watching across America witnessed something remarkable. The confident emotional control she maintained for months began cracking publicly. For the first time, genuine pressure became visible. And prosecutors pressed harder. Because they believed the truth was finally beginning to surface. But even as the confession unfolded, the case remained emotionally disturbing for another reason. Nothing about the relationship was entirely simple. Friends described emotional manipulation on both sides. Mixed signals, emotional dependency, intense intimacy followed by rejection. And that complexity made the case psychologically haunting. Because toxic relationships rarely collapse overnight. They slowly deteriorate through cycles of emotional instability until eventually something breaks. And in this case, investigators believed it ended in unimaginable violence. As the trial neared its conclusion, the courtroom atmosphere became emotionally heavy. Jurors had listened to months of testimony, graphic forensic analysis, hours of interrogation footage, painful details about obsession, betrayal, and emotional collapse. And at the center of everything sat two lives completely destroyed. One permanently lost, the other consumed by the consequences of her own decisions. Then finally, the verdict arrived. Guilty. For many watching, the moment felt inevitable, but also tragic. because justice could punish the crime. Yet it could never undo what happened inside that house. It could never restore the future Travis Alexander lost. And it could never erase the warning signs everyone wished had been taken more seriously. In the years since the case, millions of people have continued studying the story of Jodi Arias because it forces society to confront uncomfortable truths about relationships, obsession, and emotional manipulation. Not every dangerous relationship begins with violence. Sometimes it begins with emotional dependency disguised as love, possessiveness disguised as passion, control disguised as devotion. And by the time the warning signs become undeniable, it may already be too late. That became the haunting lesson left behind by the murder of Travis Alexander. A reminder that emotional instability, unchecked obsession, and psychological manipulation can slowly evolve into something devastating. And sometimes, the people closest to us can become the ones we understand the least. But perhaps the most disturbing detail of all was discovered only after the trial ended. Because hidden within the investigation files, investigators reportedly found evidence suggesting certain moments leading up to the murder may still remain unexplained to this day. Questions prosecutors believed no one would ever fully answer. Questions about motive, about intent, and about what truly happened in the final seconds inside that bathroom. Questions that continue haunting the case even now. Because despite the confession, despite the conviction, and despite justice finally being served, some darkness surrounding the murder of Travis Alexander may never completely disappear.